Welcome to the Elevate Your Call to Service podcast. Here we provide tips, tools, and resources to help law enforcement officers succeed at work and in life. I'm your host, Michael McIntosh, retired sheriff and current bureau chief in the Denver metro area. When an agency doesn't have a clear direction or vision, it stifles the leaders within the organization. They feel like they're on a ship, but don't know where to steer the boat. In today's episode, I'll talk with Andrew Hadley about different leadership styles and the impact they have on the troops, the agency, and an entire community. Drew served 22 years in law enforcement within the Denver metro area. He served as a school resource officer, field training officer, and as an instructor for firearms, defensive tactics, and police mountain bikes. He also supervised as a patrol corporal during his tenure. One of the things that I've seen either in the military or in law enforcement is that there are leaders in positions that lead by fear.
Absolutely.
And I think that that is one of the most damaging and toxic types of leadership in an organization.
I would absolutely agree. I think, like you're saying, like we've discussed, those are the leaders that you look at and you say, yeah, I'm going to take note because I'm not going to be like that guy or that gal. The thing that scares me the most is I'm seeing kind of more of that trend right now. My last agency, tremendous group of individuals there. There were a lot of leaders there, might not have necessarily held titles, commander, chief, but they did truly care about the organization. Even some of the commanders that I did have, they weren't afraid to step out and say, that's not right. What are we doing? We are putting our people at risk. We need whatever resource was needed. They weren't afraid to step out, put their necks out. Whereas a lot of things that I saw prior to me retiring was, it just seemed like leaders were more concerned about their title and making sure that they didn't rock the boat and being so quick to agree instead of seeing the issue and say, you know what, as your commander chief, I need you to realize that looking at this is not going to be beneficial for our agency. In fact, it could be very detrimental. And that kind of leadership, I think, is watered down, and the leaders that either have learned from those, not toxic leaders, but the leaders that do lead by fear. People see that and they think that's what a leader should look like. And that's definitely something that one of the foundational things that I was taught as a kid that I always tried to push out when I was on the road, or when I did have a supervisor's position for a little bit at Brighton as a corporal, or even as an FTO. Treat people better than the way that you want to be treated. And the world opens up when you just treat people with respect, whether they deserve it or not, until they give you a reason not to respect them anymore. That has served me by and far than me trying to flex, well, because I said so, because I'm your corporal, I need you to do this because I said so.
Yeah, I was just recently with a group of patrol deputies, and that we were talking about that same concept when it comes to leadership, and especially, I think it's always been there, but I think the more we get away from the leadership by some of the older generations, and I have to include myself in that. kind of that last year of the baby boomer generation, going through the military. And then when I first got into law enforcement, you never asked, why are we doing something? You were told to do something. You were a good soldier. You were a good sailor. You were a good deputy, an officer, and you just went out and did it. And that was more the style when I first got into the military in the mid '80s, early '80s, and then that style transferred right into law enforcement. Law enforcement being a paramilitary type of organization, that was the way that we led at that point. And I was having the conversation um, with the patrol deputies and the supervisors, um, knowing that we have several generations now in the workforce, and that question why, so many supervisors, especially if they've been in the military or been in law enforcement for um, any length of time, they start to take that personal. If you ask me why, um, that type of supervisor starts to take that personal, like you're questioning their authority. And I think that so many of the generations now, the question why is truly to kind of have an understanding. They're in a career and they want to know why it is that they're doing something, not because they're questioning authority, but as I'm moving through my career, this is development. It's finding out why we move in this direction.
And I think because so often now everybody is looking for what is our vision? What do we stand for? And you know as well as I do, the kid that is looking for that job and he's prepared, he knows the line, he knows the motto on the side of the car, but he doesn't understand.
Right.
And you know, even I kind of looked at it as is with trainees. You have to give them that why.
Yeah.
We're training them to look at the bullseye to figure out what exactly it is they need to focus on, and then the sergeants are the 10 ring, and the commanders are the 8 ring, and
Right.
chiefs. Because they're so focused on the bullseye, they don't see the target.
Yeah, I think that that's a great point. But I mean, if we can deliver a message um, before the why is even asked and answer that in the message, I think it's much more impactful for those that are trying to really kind of follow what it is that we're trying to do. And you talked about mission, and being clear about that. There's so many um, there's so many different teams that I've seen over the course of my experience, but again, both in the military and in law enforcement, that are operating on their own, um, and have kind of their own expectation or their own thought and idea about what the mission is. And you had mentioned, that motto on the side of the car. Um, that that motto can be perceived and interpreted in a lot of different ways. And really, our role as leaders is to make sure that there's a clear understanding of what that truly means, and it's answering that why, or answering the what. What does this mean? What is it? What is it that entire target looks like, as opposed to just do this, and then I'll tell you the next thing that you need to do.
And I think too, if you see in your department that there's 6 individual police departments being run,
Yep.
that clear nobody is clear on what that mission is.
Right.
They're looking at it, like you said, they're interpreting what that motto is, but that's incumbent on not the line supervisor, but the supervisor above them, to define that. And if it's not defined for them, they need to go to their division chief and then their chief. Because if not, the captain might be on the boat, but he doesn't know where the ship's pointed.
Right.
And to me, I think that was more of a trend because people are more worried about their job, their pension, their position. They don't want to rock the boat. They're not willing to train up who's next up. And I think that too is something that's scary because no disrespect intended, but as the old dog, we need that leadership passed on to us. We need to be able to put those tools in our toolbox. And if leaders are afraid to train their replacements, everything that they've learned, all the mistakes that they've made, and they've learned from their mistakes,
Right.
we're gonna make them again.
Yeah.
We're not gonna have the opportunity to lend on that experience to avoid something catastrophic. And in this environment now, that what used to be kind of borderline as to how we did things 20 years ago, that's the stuff that's on YouTube and starts riots and burns down cities. And we need people. And I think that's part of it too, why people are afraid to go out there and to put themselves out there and mentor, because understanding that some of the stuff that we did back in the day is not acceptable,
Right.
but it's still a teachable moment. We can still learn from those things, still learn what was successful from them, and then obviously discard what isn't appropriate.
That whole boat analogy, it resonates with me. When you talk about 6 different police agencies within one, because there's 6 different teams, and we can go out and float. In a boat, the boat's buoyant. It'll continue to be out there. The agency will continue to be an agency, but that doesn't mean that it's going anywhere. It's just really sitting dead in the water. And when day shift comes in, it starts to go north, and when swing shift goes in, it starts to go east. So really, we're not moving anywhere in an organization when we're all pointed in a different direction, or have a different understanding, because there's not clear direction and clear expectations. And then that starts to lead to protection and comfort. It's hard for humans to get out of their comfort zone, and in a law enforcement organization, that resonates even more. When you come to work, if things seem to be working and you're not rocking the boat, and it is just status quo, and you are floating, at the end of the day, you were floating, and you get to go home, right? And we end up relying on a leadership that really has no defined direction, and that's a place where I see a lot of law enforcement organizations, and a lot of that goes to they're looking out for themselves. A leader that's looking out for themselves, that truly is putting them first. In my opinion, is not a leader. They've got a title. It might be sergeant, commander, chief, lieutenant, whatever. They have a title, but they're not leading anything when the focus is, I just want to survive.
Self-preservation is not leadership.
It is not. It is not leadership. Very, very well said. And we really need to look at those that have gone before us, that have stepped out, and have not worried about comfort, but worried about what is right, what is wrong, and not just from a personal perspective, but from a team perspective, and even more importantly, what's right and what's wrong for the community that we serve. So what is our role as a law enforcement in a community, and how is it that we are leading and making sure that we are fulfilling that role, as opposed to just being a sign that somebody passes that says sheriff's office or police department. Uh, one of the comments, or one of the notions, that I kind of resonate with, in different forms of leadership positions that I've been in. If you were to remove that agency, if you were to remove that church, if you were to remove that business from the community, would the community even notice? And if it did notice, are they clapping because it's gone, or is it having having a positive impact on the community? And if it is, then we're headed in the right direction.
Absolutely.
Because really, as leaders, that's the organizations that we're involved in. That's what they need to be doing. They need to have an impact.
And those leaders are so very important, because especially now with the climate of Senate Bill 217, has your agency defined what that is, and how do we protect our community with those constraints? I the biggest thing, the letter of the law and the spirit of the law, huge even back then.
Right.
And I honestly believe Senate Bill 217, it's based on a great spirit, but the way that it's written really handcuffs law enforcement. So if our leaders are not, or if they are stuck in that self-preservation mode, and they're not going to lead their people, you know what, go make traffic stops, give me 3 tickets a day, and maybe a report or two, and that'll be good.
Right. Keep us out of trouble. Don't get involved in anything that's going to cause us to be having to work through a conflict.
But it's also incumbent on those leaders to make those calls and say, we need to get some definition. We need to know where our boundaries are. What is the foundation of our department, and how are we going to work within Senate Bill 217, but still be able to provide those services to our victims, to our community?
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. We get handed legislation. We're not the ones that make the laws. We're the ones that enforce the laws. And when 217 came out, I'll be the first to admit that there needs to be, and we should always be looking at and working on police reform. We need to be better tomorrow than we are today, and we need to be focused on that. And it's good for us to be held accountable as law enforcement by our community. What happened in 217 is, as you know, it went to an extreme, and it has really handcuffed law enforcement. And then you put in some of the criminal justice reform that's happened when we're declassifying or lowering crimes from felonies to misdemeanors, or what we can even arrest people for, put them in jail for. Again, do we need to make sure that we continually monitor that? Absolutely. But that was another example of going too far with legislation. And there's a lot of law enforcement agencies that are combating a lot of crime, and in their areas of responsibility. And that has a huge impact on leadership as well. And it's incumbent upon us to take that legislation that comes out and make sure that we are applying that in an effective way, as opposed to being complacent, as opposed to saying, well, you've completely tied our hands, so we're not going to do anything but respond to a radio call for service. That also is not the right approach. I'm not going to try to stop that car. I'm not going to have contact with that person because
I'm afraid of the responsibility that's going to come about it.
Yeah.
And it angers me that we've got people that they know that legislation is going to come out every July. There's going to be something new.
Right.
I wholeheartedly agree with you that if there's going to be cops that are going to do bad things, not only should we be policing that within our own ranks, but the community absolutely has a say in how we police.
Yes.
Just because 217 comes out, like you said, it's the bad leadership is okay. Well, we're not going to respond to calls. Whereas if we just these are the new rules of the game. Let's figure out how to play.
Right.
And to me, it just seems, from my perspective, there were a lot of agencies surrounding our jurisdiction that kind of took that role as to, okay, we're gonna just take the step back and wait for the hit to see what happens and wait to see who's gonna make the mistake first, instead of stepping up and saying, okay, we're gonna lead. We are going to see where those new parameters need to be set, where our deputies or our officers need to be, what we're going to accept as an agency as appropriate, and we're going to use those constructs of that legislation to figure out, okay, who's not towing the line, who's just bottom feeding here. Because, as you know as well as I do, we are still held accountable if we keep somebody on that's not doing the job right.
Right.
So we're shooting ourselves in the foot by, okay, well, that's just Jones. Jones has always talked like that. He's old school. Jones has a place, but if we allow Jones to continue doing what he's always done, he's going to get himself on YouTube. He's going to get the department, the city sued. And it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when.
Right. And as leaders, we're also going to be held liable and accountable for not holding and not doing our job by holding one of our officers or one of our deputies accountable for their actions. And it's in law enforcement. The old school was, you did what you needed to do to make sure that Jones was able to continue to be in law enforcement and to have a job. And that's not right. Two, I think that we live in a world, in an environment now where, thank goodness, that's being called out.
Absolutely.
And rightfully so. But as leaders, we have to make sure that we're taking action on that, and not trying to hide that, not trying to sweep that under the carpet. And we say that people are watching now, and they've always been watching.
Absolutely.
It's now they're not just watching, but they're voicing. They're holding leaders accountable now, which I think is incredibly important. to make sure that we are doing that. We're in a new day and age, and we need to be developing good leaders in our organizations, and that starts with the new officer and the new deputy. That example that is set for them. We go back and we look at the impact that had on us. Just sitting back and saying that's the sergeant I want to be someday, or that's the lieutenant that I want to be someday, and starting to emulate what it is that they demonstrate. I think that's very important, because inside an agency, those officers, those deputies, are always watching.
Absolutely.
They're taking note. They understand, and that's really what creates that culture within an organization. And what is that unit, that division, that agency as a whole? What kind of reputation do they want to have? What kind of culture do they want to be able to talk about that they have? It's critical, and it really rests upon leadership.
Absolutely. And I do want to go on the record that I don't think that anybody named Jones in law enforcement is a bad guy or gal. Let's just put that out there. But because I know that you and I both know some Joneses that have
Yes.
been tremendous law enforcement officers.
Yeah. I think that as leaders, we need to remember that that's a verb. Leading is a verb. It means that there's action with that we've got to be taking action, and we can't be stagnant. We can't be that boat that's just drifting out there. What would you say if you're a new deputy, or you're a new officer, or even a new supervisor? When we think about applying traits from other leaders, how do you see that working? How do you see that happening? How did you do that in your career?
Probably from years 1 to 5, I was just trying to learn to run around with my hair on fire and not catch anybody else on fire.
Right.
But once I really started to drill down and focus in on what leadership was, it was the leaders that were willing and able to be humble, that they didn't feel personally attacked if the plan that their deputy or their officer had was going to be better in accomplishing a mission, whether it's a traffic plan, or even going to do a high risk contact. The supervisors that are willing to allow their troops to come up with those plans, they empowered them to make decisions. Obviously, they're still going to be responsible for those decisions, right or wrong, and they can step in and say, okay, that's going down a path that's unsafe for everybody.
Right.
You and I both know there's a way to talk to people that there's something that needs to be rolled out, but we can put it in a way that still makes them feel good about having to take a bite out of that crap sandwich.
Mm-hmm.
It's the way that they communicate. It's the way that they make people feel. Going back to that whole why, you can make those points, and you can develop your troops just by the way that you talk to them. And the leaders that are definitely staying up on policy and procedures and legislation, they're willing to lead from the front. They're willing to allow their people to step in and get their hands into what leadership is, make those decisions, and just someone who, at the end of the day, knows that they care about who you are. They care about you going home at the end of your shift. They know that you might be coming to work with family issues, your wife having surgery, your kids in the hospital. Their head is not necessarily in the game, but you work with them. You rally them around them, and you take care of them. And then that compassion that you show them, they're going to turn it around and they're going to go out of their way to work for you.
Right.
Um, that's the leader that I always strive to be. That is goes back to that saying, what my foundation was is you treat people better than the way that you want to be treated. And that has served me so well in so many aspects of life.
Yeah, absolutely agree. What would you want the listeners to take away or to remember from this podcast? What's the main thing that you would want them to take away?
You had mentioned it. Leader is a title. It's a verb. People are leading by stepping up and putting themselves out there to try to do what's right. Um, don't be afraid to make decisions. Don't be afraid to just be someone that's willing to take on responsibilities. And as a new supervisor, be humble. Allow your people to do those things. If you see that potential in them, because one day you might be training them to take your job, or in some aspects, they might be taking your job.
Right.
They might be on a trajectory that gets them promoted because of what you instilled in that. Don't be afraid to train up the next generation.
Yeah, I think that's incredibly important, and impactful in a law enforcement organization. Um, when I got into the business, information was power, and you would see leaders that were really lacked confidence. They would hold the information because they didn't want to be replaced by you. And really, as leaders, one of our most important roles in an organization is to develop those that are in our care, in our charge, um, to someday take on what it is that we're doing. And it's easy for me to say, I am I going to be in law enforcement for another 2 to 6 years, somewhere in there. So I'm definitely on the end of my of my career and my trajectory, retirement trajectory. um, and it's important that I help develop somebody to take my job when I'm gone. But even as a new sergeant, you got to be pouring into the deputy and preparing the deputy to be a sergeant. And as a new lieutenant, um, pouring into those sergeants to make sure that they're coming up. And I've been in the business a long time, and there's one of the things that I have always said is be careful how you treat those that are working for you, because I've seen it many times where um, you may be working for them, and and that can go a long way, right?
Absolutely.
If you end up working for them at some point, the way that you treated them is it's going to have an impact, and you need to do that for the right reasons, but that's It has consequences if you don't.
Absolutely.
And if you want to be considered, and I think that if you take on a role of sergeant or lieutenant or whatever it is in an FTO, whatever it is in an organization, if you want to be considered good at that in that job in that role, it boils down to how do you treat those around you.
If your end goal in your career is to have a building named after you, you're in it for the completely wrong reasons. My goal was always, and I don't remember who told me this, but the police department will, or the sheriff's office will continue after you're gone,
Yep.
except for the way that you've trained people and the way that you've done things. That will last the tests of time, because if you trained people and you treated people right, your legacy will live on forever in that department. And I think that was something that as somebody who was starting to figure out in my career, when I really tried to start tapping into you for that information, that was something that was absolutely evident. And you cared about your people. You cared about wanting to develop those next leaders. And the only way that happens is if you stay humble, or you'll be humbled.
Right. And hopefully it's staying humble. Being humbled is not fun. There's that age old question: are leaders born or are leaders made? And I think that the common understanding about that from almost anybody that you talk to in leadership now is leaders are made, the leaders are developed, leaders are so there's always that again, personally making sure that we're striving to be better tomorrow than we are today, and with that comes that commitment to learning, to continue to go to training, to realize that you never really arrive. You don't have it all figured out, and that concept means that we have to be engaged and be involved. What are some of the resources that you've seen on leadership that you would recommend others to take a look at?
Some of the books that I've read here lately, with my new role where I'm at, my leaders recommended Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink and Leif Babin. The follow-up to that was The Dichotomy of Leadership. I think those are two extremely, extremely valuable resources. Even the short book of Admiral William McRaven, Make Your Bed.
Right.
He also had a book that came out after that called The Hero Code. But all these books talk about being humble, giving power to your people to make decisions. If we don't trust in them, we don't give them those tools to be successful, then that's incumbent upon us, or else they are going to fail.
Right.
But I believe that those books really do hit home for me. Just what leadership is. And then lastly, I would say find a mentor. Find somebody that you see what they do, that they are constantly moving in a direction that is in line with the agency and with your personal thought processes and morality compass.
Mm-hmm.
But then also just remember that you're not going to be here forever. So do you want your legacy to be that you're that person that everybody couldn't wait to retire, and they don't throw you a retirement party, they throw a party after that to say that
Right.
they're glad that you're gone?
Right.
Or, to have a seat at your retirement party and have people truly sad that you're leaving, but they're excited for your next chapter.
Right.
So, I can't thank you enough. You've been that mentor to me. You came to my retirement party, and I couldn't have been more honored and proud to have served under you and with you. But I think that is truly important. Find a mentor. Find somebody that truly does want what's best for the agency, and squeeze out every bit of information you can from them.
Great words. Well, thank you for the conversation today, my
I
friend.
greatly appreciate it. Thank you.
It was a pleasure just getting to sit down and chat a little bit about this incredibly important topic. And we would just encourage you to take to heart the words that were spoken this morning when it comes to leadership, and never stop working on that, and never stop leading.
That's all for this week's episode of the Elevate Your Call to Service podcast. Follow us wherever you listen to podcasts. We invite you to visit our website at leleaders.com for our free guide, 10 questions to consider before putting in for your next promotion.